case of Connie Alm. Connie Alm was born on July 18, 1974, in Malaysia. She was the younger of two daughters and enjoyed a very close relationship with her parents. In 1995, Connie moved to the United States to pursue higher education and a career in information technology. While living in the United States, Connie met a man named Brandon. He was a U.S. and an ethnic Chinese whose parents emigrated from Singapore over 20 years ago. Initially, and Brandon were just friends, but their friendship eventually blossomed into a romantic relationship. Brandon became a significant figure in Kanye's life, supporting and helping her in various ways. They got married in 2001. Kanye's life was on track in 2003. She was working as an analyst in San Diego, planning a future with her husband, and hoping to start a family. Her life changed dramatically that year. The trouble began when Connie's father, Ong Bayong, was diagnosed with cancer. Connie decided to fly to Malaysia to support her family during this difficult time. On June 1, 2003, Connie and her husband, Brandon, arrived in Malaysia. However, Brandon returned to the USA after a few days, leaving Connie to care for her father in Kuala Lumpur. Despite the distance, Connie and Brandon stayed close through daily phone calls. They would talk for hours, sharing stories about their daily lives, including their two pets. Connie's father underwent surgery to remove a kidney, but fortunately, his health began to recover. As he improved, Connie planned her return to the USA, scheduling a flight for June 14, 2003. Connie organized a farewell dinner at a local restaurant the evening before her departure, and she invited her mother, sister, and closest friends to join her. That evening, June 13, 2003, Connie and her mother arrived at the designated meeting spot later than the others. They had trouble finding a parking spot in front of the mall, so Connie parked in the underground lot. However, her mother was concerned about the poor lighting in the lot rather than the parking fee. Once they arrived at the second-floor restaurant, Connie was excited to reunite with her childhood friends whom she hadn't seen in a long time. They spent a few hours catching up, but Connie soon noticed that her mother, Pearlie, was starting to look tired. When Connie asked if her mother wanted to head home, Pearlie said she had a lot to do that day, was okay with leaving early, and promised her friends she would be back soon. Connie, her mother, and her sister Elsie got up from the table to pay for their parking. They went to the payment terminal, which was located on the first floor, a floor above the underground parking lot. As they waited in line for the terminal, Connie realized she had left the parking ticket in their car. She asked her sister and mother to stay in line while she went back down to retrieve the ticket. Elsie and Polly waited for 10 more minutes, but Connie still hadn't returned. Then her sister started calling her. The first call went unanswered, and the second one was sent to voicemail. This was unusual, and Elsie and Polly immediately sensed that something was wrong. They quickly went to the parking lot, where they were shocked to find that Connie's car was no longer there. They searched the parking lot several times to make sure, and after confirming that the car was indeed gone, they realized that Connie must have disappeared along with it. Polly was certain that something had happened to her daughter, as Connie would never leave without saying anything. Although the parking lot was poorly lit, it had surveillance cameras that might provide some clues about what had happened. The mall security initially refused to show Kanye's relatives the footage, but relented after her mother begged for their help. At midnight, Prilly and Elsie sat in front of a monitor and watched the shocking footage, which confirmed their worst fears. The footage revealed Connie's car speeding out of the underground parking lot, crashing through the barrier. Although the footage quality was poor, it was evident that a man was driving with Connie in the passenger seat. Her body was positioned as if she was trying to distance herself from the driver, leaning against the door. Upon seeing the footage, Prilly immediately filed the disappearance and kidnapping report at a police station. The police launched an investigation, while Kanye's family and friends drove around Kuala Lumpur, desperately searching for her purple proton tiara. Meanwhile, Brandon, Kanye's husband, began to feel a sense of unease. He tried calling his wife multiple times, but she didn't answer. He then contacted her mother, who informed him about the events that had transpired. The news of Kanye's disappearance left Brandon in shock. Prilly could hear him sobbing over the phone. As dawn broke, Kanye's friends and family reluctantly returned home, their search efforts having yielded no results. The police disseminated information about the disappearance and conducted their own search, but unfortunately, it didn't lead to any breakthroughs. Even the footage from the mall's parking lot, where Kanye was kidnapped, failed to provide any leads on identifying the driver of the car. More than 72 hours have passed since Kanye's loved ones last saw her. Authorities believe that if she was kidnapped, it wasn't for ransom. If money was the motive, the kidnapper would have demanded it by now. A disturbing find was made by police when they discovered Kanye's car left empty on a city street. The front right tire was severely damaged, indicating it had been driven on while flat for some time, causing it to shred. In the back of the car, a large red stain was found on the passenger seat. Forensic experts collected evidence, including scrapings from the back seat, fingerprints from the steering wheel, and other parts of the car. There were many clues found in the vehicle. Connie's family and friends held on to hope and prayed for her safe return. However, their hopes were crushed the next day after her car was found. On June 17th, a road worker detected a strong, foul smell coming from a manhole near the highway. Upon lifting the lid, he discovered a body that someone had attempted to burn using 2 car tires and sticks. A team of leading forensic experts from the Royal Malaysian Police immediately arrived at the scene. They found 2 car tires filled with concrete which had been used as stands for road signs lying on top of the body. It appeared that whoever had hidden the body trying to make it harder to identify. Although the discovery of the body seemed to confirm the family's worst fears, Kannie's mother, Prilly, refused to believe that her daughter was dead without official confirmation. "Until they confirm it, we will continue to hope that she will turn up alive," she said. The family went to the morgue, but the doctor said that they couldn't confirm the identity of the body yet. Connie's family members provided DNA samples for comparative analysis. Unfortunately, the results confirmed their worst nightmare. The body was indeed that of their daughter, Connie. Some sources claim that before the DNA test results, Connie's family identified the jewelry on the body. However, as a loving mother, Prilly held onto the hope that her daughter was still alive until the very end. The emotional torture she endured is unimaginable. The autopsy revealed that Connie had 2 stab wounds to her abdomen, and a medical forensics expert found signs of strangulation. A cloth was tied around her neck in multiple knots, and semen was found inside her body, which served as a source of DNA. A few days after the body was discovered, an incident raised questions about the work of police. An undercover policeman, Subramaniam Ravichandran, reported to his superiors that on the night of Connie's disappearance, he was on duty with his partner, patrolling the streets of Kuala Lumpur at night on their motorcycles. Both officers were dressed in civilian clothes. They noticed a car parked incorrectly, taking up half the road, and stopped to investigate if anyone was inside. Ravichandran approached the driver's door and saw a man behind the wheel with a woman in the passenger seat. He knocked on the window, and when the man lowered it partially, Ravichandran displayed his police ID and asked what they were doing. The driver replied they were just chatting and not doing anything illegal. Ravichandran then requested to see their IDs. As the driver handed over the documents, she in the passenger seat made unusual hand gestures, seemingly asking for help, but stopped whenever her assumed boyfriend looked at her. Noticing this, Ravichandran asked the driver to step out of the car. However, the driver responded aggressively, claiming Ravichandran was not a police officer but a thief. He then raised the window and reached for the ignition. Realizing the car might drive off, Ravichandran drew his pistol and shot the right front wheel. Despite this, the car sped away. Ravichandran and his partner pursued on a motorcycle but were unable to catch up, which is puzzling given the car had a flat tire. At the time, the Malaysian Police Department was in a state of disarray, which might explain why the officer didn't call for backup or report the incident. The car with a flat tire was a purple Proton Tiara, driven by 27-year-old Ahmad Najib bin Aris, accompanied by a woman named Connie Alm. Although the police chase did not result in an immediate arrest, the officers managed to obtain documents from the driver. Tragically, Connie Alm was later found dead. It is possible that if the officer had acted differently during the encounter, the outcome might have been different. Unfortunately, Ravichandran only informed his superiors about the incident after Connie's body was discovered. The only positive outcome of that night was that the police had obtained documents that could help identify the suspect. Besides Kenny's family, many Malaysians attended her farewell ceremony. Her death was a devastating loss for her husband, Brandon. Meanwhile, the police launched a search for Ahmad Najib. They discovered that he didn't live at the address listed in his documents, but his name was genuine, providing multiple leads to track him down. The police searched for Ahmad Najib's name in the Registry of Documented Marriages and the National Agency of Social Support. They found a match, revealing that Ahmad Najib bin Aris was born and raised in Muar, Malaysia. He was the second of 4 siblings and had dropped out of school to work and support his family. In 1998, he moved from Muar to Kuala Lumpur, where he got married and had 2 children. Since 2000, he had worked as a cabin cleaner for Malaysia Airlines. Knowing the name of Ahmad Najib's wife and her workplace, the police began surveillance. She worked at a metropolitan bank, and after her shift ended, undercover police officers followed her to determine her home address. Now that they knew where Ahmad Najib lived, the police had to ensure he was inside the house without alerting him. For 3 days, they monitored the house, but Ahmad Najib didn't appear. At one point, investigators doubted whether Ahmad Najib still lived with his family, but this was a hasty conclusion. On the 4th day of surveillance, at around 4 a.m., a cab pulled up to the house and Ahmad Najib stepped out. Within a minute, he was handcuffed and taken to the police station for questioning. News of the arrest and the suspect's identity quickly reached the press. Many people who knew Ahmad Najib were shocked to learn that he was suspected of kidnapping and killing Connie Alm. Those who knew him described Ahmad Najib as a devoted husband, a caring father of 2, and an overall good person. However, investigators soon discovered that he may have been hiding a darker side. During the initial interrogation, Ahmad Najib remained calm and requested to speak only with the head of the Criminal Investigation Division. It wasn't until he was presented with evidence linking him to Connie Alm that Ahmad Najib began to deny any wrongdoing. His confidence seemed to wane as the evidence mounted. Investigators showed him 2 IDs that he had given to an officer on the night of Connie Alm's kidnapping. They also revealed that they had found bloodstains on his jacket and jeans, which DNA analysis would likely confirm to be Connie Alm's blood. After realizing the officers had solid evidence and were not bluffing, Ahmad Najib confessed to kidnapping and killing Connie Alm. Within 10 days of the kidnapping, on June 23, 2003, he was taken to court, where he repeated his confession. The police then conducted an investigative experiment where Ahmad Najib showed them all the locations he had been with Connie Alm. He provided a detailed account of how he forced her to be intimate with him multiple times, how he took her life, and how he attempted to dispose of her body. Evidence supporting his statements was found at all the locations he led the police to. The investigation began at the underground parking lot, where cameras captured footage of Ahmad Najib. According to his statement, he was waiting for his former boss, who had fired him and whom he sought revenge against. However, the claim about the former boss was never verified. Hiding in the darkness, he observed Connie Alm searching for something in her car and seized the opportunity to take advantage of the situation. He forcefully pushed her into the car, issuing threats that if she attempted to escape or seek help, she would face dire consequences. Overwhelmed, Connie Alm became disoriented and obediently followed his instructions. Next, he took the driver's seat and sped out of the parking lot. After crashing through a barrier, he stopped in an industrial area where he began to harass Connie Alm. Just as this was happening, a plainclothes police officer approached the car. Ahmad Najib falsely told the officer that he didn't know he had taken the wrong person until the officer asked him and his victim for their identification. Even assuming Ahmad Najib had intended to kidnap his former boss, his guilt remains unchanged. Undoubtedly, his former boss would have suffered the same fate as Connie Alm. According to Ahmad Najib's account, he managed to evade the pursuing officer. Despite the officer possessing his documents, Ahmad Najib failed to consider releasing Connie Alm. Instead, he stopped the car on the street to replace a tire damaged by a bullet. A car containing a woman was parked at the spot where he had pulled over. He approached she and asked for a car jack, intending to change his tire. However, he noticed Kenyang signaling to she, who then handed him the jack. He abandoned the idea of changing the tire and drove off immediately. Later, he stopped at a secluded area and used a knife to threaten Kenyang, forcing her to engage in intimate acts with him. Afterwards, he drove to another district where he coerced Connie Alm into satisfying him again, with both of them in the back seat. Connie Alm pleaded for mercy, but he took her life instead. He then disposed of her body in a manhole near a highway, moved the car to another location, and left it there. 16 hours later, he returned to the scene with a gasoline canister in an attempt to conceal evidence of the crime. DNA analysis confirmed that the semen found in Connie Alm's body belonged to Ahmad Najib Ben Aris. His DNA was also discovered in the car, along with his fingerprints, providing further irrefutable proof of his guilt. Additionally, the analysis revealed that the blood on his jacket and jeans belonged to Connie Alm. The trial began on September 15, 2003, 3 months after Connie Alm's death. This high-profile case drew widespread attention from the Malaysian media and public. The trial attracted not only ordinary Malaysians and journalists, but also individuals seeking to boost their reputation, including numerous attorneys representing Ahmad Najib. Despite admitting guilt during the investigation, overwhelming evidence, including DNA proof, Ahmad Najib changed his stance after consulting 6 attorneys. At his first trial, he claimed his confession was made under police pressure. However, the judge before whom Ahmad Najib confessed immediately after his arrest testified that there were no signs of physical abuse and Ahmad Najib appeared calm and relaxed. The attorneys then shifted their strategy, arguing that Connie Alm was in the car with Ahmad Najib voluntarily. They suggested that Connie Alm, a black belt in Taekwondo, should have attempted to escape if she were being held against her will. However, this attempt to blame Connie Alm was rejected, as people respond differently to critical situations. However, another claim surfaced, stating that Connie Alm had consensual intimacy with Ahmad Najib and that Connie Alm's death was caused by strangulation used to heighten the experience. Forensic experts disagreed with and rejected this account of what happened. The cloth around Connie's neck was tied in multiple knots, suggesting that Connie Alm had no intention of loosening it. Indeed, the cloth was so tight that the skin beneath was the only area on the body not affected by the fire. Furthermore, the cloth was a type used for cleaning plane windows, and given the defendant's job as a cabin cleaner, this linked him more closely to the crime. Additionally, the lawyers struggled to explain the stabbed wounds on Connie's body. At this point, Ahmad Najib's attorneys advised him to remain silent and not testify. Many questioned why Connie didn't escape the car when she had at least 2 chances to do so. On February 23, 2005, Ahmad Najib bin Aris was convicted of all charges connected to the crime committed against Connie Alm. The evidence pointed to him as the sole perpetrator. Ahmad Najib received the maximum sentence under Malaysian law, 20 years imprisonment and 10 strokes of the cane for violating Connie Alm's sexual integrity, plus the death penalty for causing her death. In Malaysia, the death penalty is carried out by hanging, a method that differs significantly from the lethal injection used in some other countries such as the USA. Ahmad Najib's lawyers attempted to appeal the sentence twice but were unsuccessful both times. In 2010, Ahmad Najib petitioned the head of state to commute his death sentence to life imprisonment, maintaining his innocence. However, his plea for clemency was rejected. More than 13 years after Kenyang's death, on September 23, 2016, Ahmad Najib's sentence was carried out. He was 40 years old at the time of his execution. April 25, 2011 is made to 999, reporting that a house is on fire in Georgia Drive, in Nottingham, England. 2 young boys have fled the house with the family dog as the fire rips through the building. Emergency services quickly arrive on scene and try to put out the blaze. As the fire ravages the house and the quiet suburban streets, word begins to spread that a woman has been found dead inside. One neighbor remarks, "You see things like that on the TV, but when you know the person, you just can't believe it." At about 7:30 that morning, fire investigation dog handler David Cross was paged with the control room saying he needed to attend the nearest police station at around 9 o'clock for a briefing before the fire investigation team went down to the scene, with them arriving at the house at around 11 a.m. The police cordoned off a large area around the estate, but there was substantial interest from the press. Journalist Rebecca Sherdley said that the first the media had heard of the incident was that there had been a fire on Georgia Drive. Many neighbors had come outside and reporters learned from speaking to them that the two young boys had managed to escape, but the lady inside had died. From the outside, there was severe smoke damage to the windows. The source of the fire was quickly found. It appeared to be around a body that was lying on the bedroom floor. The task of investigators was to try and work out exactly what had happened. The older of the two children who lived at the house, who was just 14 years old, told the detective as a horrifying and disturbing story. He explained that he had woken up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom. After exiting his bedroom, he had come face to face with a man in a mask, who proceeded to throw a hammer at him before fleeing. He then said that he went into his mother's bedroom that was on fire, where he found that she had been attacked. In a state of panic, he grabbed his little brother before running out of the burning building. As the flames spread through the family home, the children went next door to raise the alarm. He then ran back inside to rescue the pet dog, but he was unable to get to his mother, and she was still inside as the house continued to burn. The badly burned body was recovered and then taken away for a post-mortem. Due to the fire, the body had to be identified using dental records. The victim was discovered to be 47-year-old mother of two, Jacqueline Bartam, known to most as Jackie. After she had been identified, the next task was to determine how she had died. It quickly became clear to the police that the fire was not an accident. It had been started deliberately to cover up the fact that she had died of blunt force trauma caused by multiple blows to the head. Jackie's partner Simon Matters had heard on the news that there had been a fire at a house on Georgia Drive. Upon hearing about the fire, he sent a text message to Jackie's sister, who confirmed that Jackie was missing and that the remains of her body had been found in the fire. He raced back, not knowing the details about what had happened. As the news began to spread about what had happened that night, people began to hear more about the victim of this disturbing attack. Jackie Bartland was a doting mother of two young boys. In 1996, she had given birth to her first son with her partner Adrian, and the pair got married 3 years after. They would later have a second son together. They had a stable and comfortable life. They lived in a nice detached house in a middle-class area, and the children attended the local private school. But the happiness was not to last, however, as Jackie and Adrian's marriage would eventually end in divorce. Following the split, she had moved with her sons to another part of Nottingham. In May 2008, Jackie met Simon Matters on a night out. He didn't go out with the intention of meeting somebody, but he was soon smitten with her. Her loving and caring nature stood out to Simon, and he noted how she showed a genuine interest in people. The pair later became an item. By all accounts, Jackie was a loving woman who didn't have enemies. Nobody could understand why anyone would want to kill her in such a brutal way. Just 2 days after the terrifying house fire, the police announced that they had made an arrest. The full picture of what had happened wouldn't come to light until a name suppression order was lifted, allowing the press to name the alleged killer and give details on what had happened. This had been a meticulously planned and orchestrated murder. It wasn't a stranger who had broken in and savagely killed a woman at random. The killer was a child, Jackie's 14-year-old son, Daniel Bartam. Daniel was born on the 11th of November 1996, with his little brother being born several years later. When he was just 8 years old, Daniel became obsessed with fictional gore and violence. As he began to retreat further and further into his dark world, he became more reclusive and isolated. He would spend the majority of his time in his bedroom feeding into his obsessions. He would watch his collection of horror films, with movies like Saw and Nightmare on Elm Street being frequently rewatched, as well as playing video games. Just 12 months after becoming obsessed with gore and violence, his life would be turned upside down. His parents' marriage fell apart and the couple would later divorce. Daniel and his brother would go to live with Jackie. Jackie went out of her way to try and minimize the disruption and continued to pay for his private schooling for around 6 months until it was no longer affordable. The divorce, as with many separating couples, had huge financial implications for the family. Due to the financial strain, she had to remove Daniel from his private school and instead sent him to the local comprehensive. Forensic psychologist Professor Kevin Brown said that as he had been removed from his private school and sent to a state school, he could have experienced bullying and feelings of ostracization from his classmates, as well as feeling a loss of status. It was also around this time of him changing schools that Simon and Jackie began to discuss moving in together, with them both selling their houses and buying one as a couple. But although they found several houses that they liked, they weren't able to find one that Daniel approved of. It was then too that Daniel's behavior began to change even more, becoming defiant and playing up. Daniel didn't chip in around the house and didn't do chores, with Simon describing him as selfish. Alone and frustrated with things happening that were outside of his control, Daniel began to isolate himself more and shut himself off from the world. Daniel also started to become more and more angry with the lack of attention he was receiving. His mother now had a new partner, and things were happening in his life that he couldn't control, all of which was feeding into his rage. He spent most of his time up in his bedroom and nobody knew what he was doing up there. From around the age of 12, he was mending laptops for people, and that's what they assumed he was doing alone upstairs. He also made several YouTube videos. One person who became concerned with Daniel's increasingly odd behavior was Simon. He was concerned that Daniel was too young to be consuming such explicit and adult material at his age. Whenever Jackie attempted to discipline her son, he would often become violent in an attempt to regain control. On more than one occasion, Simon had to intervene to protect Jackie from her young son. Simon described one occasion where Daniel had started shouting at Jackie. He got so close to her face that Simon had to put himself between the two. Daniel proceeded to run upstairs, and for the next 2 minutes he would kick the banisters, hit the wall and swear and shout before going into his room and slamming the door shut. Jackie was so shaken and scared by her son's outburst. In 2010, he was reported missing from home by his mother. Frantic with worry, she contacted the police, sparking a huge search to try and find him. He was eventually found at 1 a.m. by officers as he was walking back to the old home his family had shared before the divorce. The police took him back to his mother's house, where she was again back at square one. Jackie continued to bear the brunt of his increasingly worrying behavior. She found a smaller and more affordable house in the Arnold region of Nottingham. In preparation for the move, Simon helped Daniel pack up his old bedroom. He found plastic toy boxes that were full of urine and feces that had clearly been there for some time. He also found dirty towels that Daniel had used to clean himself that he had then hidden under the bed. Simon was horrified and became even more concerned for Daniel. He soon made another disturbing discovery. Hidden in a laptop bag were a load of Jackie's underwear that she had been looking for. Forensic psychologist Professor Kevin Brown has argued that this was not due to a sexual motive, but rather an attempt to gain attention. Daniel's strange behavior was also noted at school. Following an outburst of violence, in May 2010, he was referred to the school counselor. After this, concerns would continue to mount. In his counseling sessions, he would speak about hearing voices and how the voices were telling him to hurt people. He discussed visions he was having of killing people, and also spoke about how his school tie that he had called Fred had a life of its own and was trying to strangle him. He would also spend hours writing stories with Simon, saying some of them focused on children killing each other. He would draw pictures of people stabbing each other, with this taking place around a year and a half before the murder of Jackie. He had gone from consuming violent media to creating and producing it himself. As he moved into his early teens, he continued to feed into his fixation with violence in film. It was also around this time that he began to watch soap operas. Emmerdale and Coronation Street became ones he especially enjoyed, with one character in particular becoming an obsession for Daniel. The character of John Stape was a regular on Coronation Street, who started in 2007. He quickly became the villain of the show, involved in several major storylines, including kidnap and murder, before being killed off in 2011. One of these storylines involved him battering another character called Charlotte Hoyle with a hammer, before leaving her body in the wreckage of a tram crash to cover up his crime. Other stories that Daniel wrote involved him being the most famous soap opera star that had ever lived, and had been on a soap for 50 years, highlighting his desire for either fame or infamy. Bartam immersed himself in his fantasy world to such an extent that the boundaries between real life and fiction would become disturbingly and tragically blurred. By March 2011, just 6 weeks before the murder of Jackie Bartam, a mental health assessment was carried out at Thornywood Child and Adolescent Mental Health Services. Following the assessment, it said that Daniel demonstrated no mental illness and he was judged as being little or no risk or threat to himself or others. By April 2011, the relationship between Jackie and Daniel had continued to break down and had now reached an all-time low. He was still obsessed with violent media and much of his anger was fixated on and directed towards his mother. April 25, 2011, everything appeared normal in the Bartam household. Simon had been texting Jackie on the Easter Sunday, and everything appeared to be fine, with her saying that Daniel had plans to go out with his grandparents. He took the pet dog Meg to get her coat trimmed, mowed his mother's lawn, and ate some Easter eggs. Daniel spent the previous evening rewatching one of the Saw films. In the early hours of the 25th, he would set his disturbing plan in motion. It has been reported that he left the house and headed into the garden where he had hidden a can of petrol and a claw hammer in the shed. After walking back through the garden and into the house, he headed upstairs. After entering his mother's bedroom, he watched her as she slept for a while. He then proceeded to raise the hammer above his head, bringing it down with disturbing force. He struck his sleeping mother 7 times, fracturing both her skull and her face. After rolling her onto the floor, he used scraps of newspaper to surround her body. He then proceeded to douse her in petrol and then started a fire. He ran to his younger brother, waking him up to tell him that the house was ablaze, before running out of the burning building. As he waited on the street for the police to arrive, he began to tell the neighbors that a masked intruder had broken into their house and left through his mother's bedroom window. Even before the police got there, Daniel started lying to those around him. It wasn't long before officers started to question Daniel's version of events. When Simon initially saw the news reports, it just said that there had been a house fire in Nottingham. An hour later, it was confirmed that the fire had taken place on Georgia Drive, where Jackie had lived. Although it was yet to be confirmed exactly which house had been caught in the blaze, he said he knew it would be Jackie's, and he knew who would be responsible. Despite the best efforts of Daniel Bartam to cover up his crime, forensics were able to find many pieces of evidence that pointed the finger solely in his direction. When the forensics team went into the home to search it, 2 hammers were found. One was a claw hammer, which following an examination was proven to be the murder weapon. The other hammer was a lump hammer that had been planted by Daniel to act as a red herring and throw the investigators off the scent. According to former Detective Chief Inspector Colin Sutton, who worked with the Metropolitan Police Force, the degree of planning that he had exhibited, from planning the murder to setting the fire, using a decoy weapon and adamantly sticking to his story, demonstrated a determination not usually seen in a 14-year-old boy who had committed such a serious offense. When examining his laptop, officers found even more disturbing evidence. Whilst he had deleted it from his computer days before the murder, officers were able to recover a story that Daniel had written. It was a fictional version of himself where he was the central character. In the story, Daniel was a master criminal who got away with a string of gruesome murders, rapes, and assaults. Also in the story, he bludgeoned his mother to death with a hammer before setting fire to the body in order to make it look like an intruder had done it. But as the events of the 25th of April unfolded in the early morning hours, it proved to be more than a fantasy. This was his plan. Like the version of himself in his story, Daniel pretended to police that the attack had been carried out by an intruder. He wrote, "The only place he couldn't get away with his bad deeds was with his mother Jackie. So, one evening, made it look as though there was a break-in, and murdered his mother with a hammer, then set her and the family home alight." After his denial and vehemently sticking to his story, Daniel admitted to killing his mother and proceeded to tell the police an entirely different version of events. On the day of the murder, he said he had argued with his mother, and she had then gone off to bed. He said that at around 1 a.m. he had stormed into her bedroom, and they had a blazing row about a pair of trainers that he couldn't find. He said he then returned with a hammer and beat her to death. But the idea that this had been a spur-of-the-moment attack didn't match with what officers had found. His script showed this was not a murder that had come from a fit of rage. This was a planned and thought-out murder that had been meticulously plotted. When trying to ascertain exactly why Daniel had committed the offense, neuroscientist Professor Francesca Hape spoke in a documentary about Daniel's case and noted that people with psychopathic tendencies don't have a break in their behavior that other people would. For example, seeing someone in distress would cause people to stop, and whilst this isn't a motivation to do harm, people with psychopathy don't stop from doing harm. She said that Daniel's case is completely mysterious and seemingly without any motive. She also noted that children and their brains are still developing throughout childhood and adolescence, so determining if a child has psychopathy is incredibly difficult. But it is clear that adults who have many psychopathic traits typically show them when they are much younger. Forensic psychologist Professor Kevin Brown said that what made Daniel so different is in a crime as violent as his, one would expect to see a history of abuse and neglect, but this appeared to be absent in his case. The only thing that appeared to traumatize him was the divorce of his parents. On the 4th of October 2011, Daniel Bartam entered a plea of not guilty. He claimed he had been provoked. Before his trial started, Daniel Bartam was examined by mental health experts for the prosecution and defense, and they agreed that he did not have any psychiatric or psychological condition. 23rd of January 2012. Daniel Bartam's trial began, and it was now the job of the Crown Prosecution Service to prove that he had deliberately killed his mother. The case was unprecedented and caused significant media interest. Very few had ever followed a case of such brutality committed by someone so young against a family member. It was also unique due to the levels of planning that Daniel had shown leading up to the murder. Journalist Rebecca Sherdley, who was reporting on and covering the trial, said that when she saw Daniel in the dock, she was surprised at how young he'd looked. She said he didn't look 14 years old, he looked maybe 11 or 12. She also described him as sitting meekly in the dock, but when he was cross-examined after giving evidence, he became arrogant and gave as good as he got. He would put his head in his hands frequently, but not seemingly due to remorse or shame, as he was peeking through his hands to see who was watching him. Simon Matters, Jackie's partner, believed this was all for show. There were no tears. There was no remorse. It appeared that Daniel was completely disinterested and couldn't be bothered to pay attention. Daniel's barrister had asked if he had planned on killing his mother. Daniel replied, "I didn't plan to kill her at that time." In court, the jury heard that Daniel had immersed himself in a fantasy world and the boundaries between his fictional and real life had become tragically blurred. He told the court, "In the story, I got away with it, and I thought I could get away with it in real life." The evidence was overwhelming, so the defense Daniel used was that he had committed the murder after suffering verbal and physical abuse at the hands of his mother. This gave him a defense in law of loss of control which, if proven, would reduce an allegation of murder to manslaughter. But this contradicted what many people knew of his mother. Jackie was known to be a kind-hearted and good-natured woman, and nobody had ever seen her mistreat her children or be abusive. His arrogance seemingly knew no bounds. Towards the end of the trial, he turned towards Simon and ran his finger across his neck, in a motion that indicated slitting someone's throat. Simon said he didn't find it intimidating. He said it was just Daniel being Daniel. After a 2-week trial, Daniel Bartam was unanimously found guilty of murder. When the jury came back with the verdict, Daniel hung his head and looked down towards the floor, appearing as if he was about to cry. Some have speculated that this wasn't due to remorse, but more likely a realization that his life was effectively over. The judge, Mr. Justice Julian Flo, said, "I am quite satisfied that there was no physical or verbal abuse by your mother, such as you alleged in your evidence at trial." The judge also added that it was a grotesque and senseless killing. On the 2nd of April 2012, Daniel Bartam was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 16 years. He is eligible for release in 2028, but this will not happen if it is deemed that he is still a danger to others. Upon being unanimously convicted and sentenced, Mr. Justice Julian Flo, who had presided over the trial, decided to have the reporting restrictions lifted. The decision in this case to lift the anonymity on Daniel's identity and release his name and details of his crime to the public, despite his young age, allowed for the press to report on exactly what had happened. Detective Chief Inspector Kate Maynall, who had led the investigation, said she had never dealt with such a horrific case. The level of violence, degree of planning, and extent of his lies is not only shocking, but it is also chilling that a boy of 14 could do this. This murder has devastated everyone involved. There is only one person who knows why it happened, and Daniel has lied consistently throughout, making attempts to besmirch Jacqueline's character. Everyone who knew her knew she lived for her children and was a warm and loving mother. Maybe one day Daniel will tell the truth, as there are several gaps that only he can fill. In a statement released on behalf of the family, Jackie Bartlam's parents said that Daniel's attempts to depict her as a bad mother couldn't be further from the truth. She was, they said, a wonderful, loving, and caring woman who would always be there to help if anyone was in trouble. The statement said that the family was still struggling to come to terms with what Daniel had done. We find it so hard to explain what we're going through. There are no winners here because not only have we lost Jackie, but we have lost Daniel too because of what he's done. We know it was the right result at court, but trying to understand how a boy you have loved for 14 years can do something like this is so difficult. The most difficult part for us, and something that only Daniel can answer, is why. Simon has said that although he doesn't hate Daniel, he doesn't love him either, saying he has no feelings towards him at all. I believe in forgiveness, but there's some things you can forgive and some things you can't. It was reported recently that Simon had received a letter from the Ministry of Justice telling him that Daniel Bartland was to have his sentence reviewed as he had moved to an adult prison. The letter read, Simon said he was horrified by the decision. I don't believe that he can be rehabilitated with what he did and the horrific nature of it, and the way he was so manipulative. My only fear is that he will have manipulated the parole board and pretended he's better. That's my only fear. I don't fear him. The facts of exactly what happened that night may never be fully known, as there is only one person alive who knows the truth, and that is Daniel Bartlam. What we do know is that those who knew and loved Jackie are determined that she will be remembered as a loving mother and partner who cared deeply for people, and not by the tragic and appalling way that her life was taken. Case of Michelle Missy. In the quiet suburbs of Southern California, the disappearance and tragic death of Michelle Yvette Missy Avila deeply shook a close-knit community. Her story is one of friendship, betrayal, and a devastating loss that left an indelible mark on those who knew her. The vanishing of Missy Avila caused shockwaves in the community, as friends, family, and law enforcement mobilized in a desperate search to find her. The quest to uncover the truth behind her disappearance would reveal a disturbing tale of betrayal among those she trusted. Missy was known for her bright smile and caring nature, a young woman with dreams of a promising future. As the details surrounding her disappearance emerged, the heartbreaking story of friendships turned sinister captivated the nation's attention. This is the story of Michelle Yvette Missy Avila, her whose life was tragically cut short. Missy was born on February 8, 1968, and grew up in our later Los Angeles. She lived with her mother and 3 brothers and attended San Fernando High School with her 2 best friends, Karen Severson and Laura Doyle. Missy and Karen had been best friends since they were 8 years old, but the girls started to drift apart once they entered high school. Missy was very beautiful and had very long hair, which she loved, and she was quite popular and well-liked by most of her peers. Karen and Laura began to feel envious of the attention Missy received from others, especially from boys. During Missy's sophomore year of high school, a rumor began to spread that claimed Missy had been engaging in sexual relationships with several boys, all of whom had girlfriends. This rumor prompted a group of girls to confront Missy outside of school and assault her severely. As soon as Missy got home, her parents pressed charges against the ringleader of the attack, Sonia Bond. Missy was expected to appear in court on October 8, 1985 to testify against Sonia, but she would sadly never get that opportunity. Earlier in September, Missy had a falling out with both Karen and Laura due to the same rumor that had been spread a year earlier, in which Missy was accused of having sexual relationships with her friends' boyfriends. This time, the 2 girls involved were her best friends, Karen and Laura. Missy began dating a boy named Randy earlier in their junior year, but their relationship only lasted around a month before Missy broke things off, as she couldn't stand his constant partying. Not long after, Karen and Randy started dating and moved in together. However, Randy still had feelings for Missy, and Karen saw him flirting with her. Missy turned Randy down and told him she wasn't interested in rekindling their relationship. Missy also tried to be a good friend by telling Karen she should consider ending the relationship with Randy and try to find a better boyfriend. This angered Karen, and she and Laura spread rumors again and decided to confront Missy at one of the parks in their neighborhood. Missy tried pleading with them, telling them she would never betray either of them like that, and that these were the same rumors that were spread the year prior. Eyewitnesses claimed that Karen was seen shouting at Missy, threatening her with a broken beer bottle, pushing her to the ground, and slapping her before she and Laura stormed off. This incident occurred 10 days before Missy's murder. Not long after that incident, Laura expressed regret and contacted Missy, and the two of them decided to put everything behind them and continue with their friendship. However, Karen was still avoiding Missy until October 1st, when she contacted Missy and sincerely apologized to her about everything that had escalated between them. This meant a lot to Missy, as she had started to miss her friends, and the trio made plans to hang out at Stonehurst Park later that same day. On October 1st, 1985, Missy told her mom that she made plans to hang out with her friends and her mom gave her permission to go, but she had to be back home by 6 p.m. Missy went outside and waited for Laura to pick her up. After Laura picked her up, the girls drove around for a while before making their way to Stonehurst Park, where they parked the car and waited for Karen to show up. A few minutes passed and Karen pulled into the parking lot with their other friend, Eva, in the passenger seat. That's when things took a turn for the worse for Missy. When Karen entered the parking lot, she parked extremely close to Laura's car, rolled down her window and began yelling at Laura. Laura also rolled down her window and started yelling back at Karen. Missy and Eva just sat there, shocked, watching their friends shout abusive things at each other. Missy had no idea what they were arguing about. Suddenly, Karen backed up and sped out of the parking lot, and Laura followed her for 45 minutes. They drove recklessly north of the city and into the mountains, both girls driving with such extreme anger that Missy and Eva were begging the girls to calm down and pull the cars over. The girls drove right into a parking lot that led to a huge forest. Laura and Karen got out of their cars, confronted each other, and continued to fight. Missy got out of the car in an attempt to stop her friends from fighting. However, as soon as she left the car, Karen and Laura suddenly ceased their argument, turned their attention to Missy, and approached her aggressively. They got so close to Missy that she was unable to re-enter the car or move away from it. Karen then laughed at Missy and informed her that they were not actually fighting and had no animosity towards each other, but rather they were angry with Missy. They revealed that the entire situation was a ploy to lure Missy into the woods so that they could confront her and teach her a lesson. They then shouted at Missy and explained that they had spread the rumors because they knew for a fact that she had slept with their boyfriends and they were not going to let her get away with it. Missy tried pleading with them, telling them again that she would never do anything like that she never slept with anyone, but they wouldn't listen. When Missy started to shut down, the girls grabbed her and pushed her away from the car and towards a trail that led into the forest. Given that Missy was quite petite compared to the other girls, being only 4 feet 10 and 95 pounds, while Karen was 5 feet 2 and over 200 pounds, and Laura was 5 feet 6 and 135 pounds, Missy was unable to defend herself against the constant pushes by the two girls as they forced her to walk further down the trail. Eva was in the car during the entire altercation. She finally got out of the car and started walking behind the group. Eva was not involved in anything the girls did in the forest, and she didn't even know why she was brought along in the first place. When the group was out of view from the parking lot and deep into the forest, Laura stopped and faced Missy, who was crying helplessly and scared, and punched her right in the face. As soon as Laura started punching her, Karen joined in, and within seconds, Missy was on the ground, being beaten, punched, and stomped on. When they stopped, Laura pulled out a knife, grabbed Missy by the hair, and started cutting off chunks of her hair. They did this intentionally because they knew how much Missy loved her beautiful long hair. Karen wanted to join in on the hair cutting, but since she didn't have a knife, she just started pulling out chunks with her hands while Eva stood there watching it all happen. After they had finished that activity, they produced restraints, bound Missy's arms behind her back, and gagged her. Since there was a river around 10 feet away from their location, Laura walked into the stream, looked directly at Missy, began running her hands through the water, gave Missy a smirk, and started taunting her, asking her to come into the water with her. When Missy did not move, Karen seized her, forcefully stood her up and shoved her towards the river, causing her to fall down the hill. Since her arms were restrained behind her back, her face slammed down onto the ground, and she rolled up to the river. Laura and Karen then grabbed her and dragged her into the water. That's when Eva hastily ran back up the trail to the cars. Upon arriving at the cars, Eva realized that both vehicles were locked and too far to fetch assistance. She reluctantly started walking back down the trail until she heard a terrifying scream. She stopped, turned around, and swiftly ran back to the cars, where she lay on the ground in a fetal position and waited for approximately an hour for the girls to return. Eventually, she saw Laura and Karen, who were dripping wet and smiling and laughing. But Missy was not with them. Laura and Karen were holding Missy's body in the water that was 8 inches deep. The scream that Eva heard happened when Missy was briefly able to get her head above the water, but then Karen grabbed her head and pushed it back into the water. When the girls realized that Missy was near death, they released her, ran to a large log and dropped it on her head. The girls then left the forest, got into their cars with Eva, and went home. For hours later, Laura called Missy's mother, Irene Avila, claiming that she had dropped Missy off with 3 boys driving a blue Camaro after getting gas. Laura said she returned to the location, but Missy and the boys had already left. On October 4th, 1985, Missy's body was found face down in a stream in Big Two Hanger Canyon in Angeles National Forest, 3 days later by a group of hikers. Police found that she had been forcibly drowned in 8 inches of water and her waist-length hair had been cut off. A 4-foot log was found on top of her body and cigarettes. Beer and men's overalls were found near where her body was discovered. The girls told Missy's parents and the detectives that Missy had gone off with 2 men in a blue Camaro before she disappeared, which made the random items around the crime scene seem more plausible. This false claim sent the detectives on a fruitless investigation for the non-existent men for 3 years. Irene later said she had no reason to suspect Karen or Laura were involved in her daughter's death because both of them attended Missy's funeral and Laura sent the family a sympathy card with $20. Karen also moved in with Missy's family for a long time, outwardly showing support and trying to help catch the killers, all while closely monitoring the investigation and attempting to divert the investigators from her own involvement. Karen was intensely focused on the murder, frequently visiting Missy's grave, covering the walls of her room with pictures of Missy and newspaper articles about the crime, and repeatedly returning to the creek where Missy's body was discovered. At one point, she even told Irene that she had seen Missy's ghost. After 3 years, on July 26, 1988, Eva Chirumbolo, the other teenager who had taken the 45-minute drive into the mountains, finally came forward and told the police everything that had happened. She explained the rumors, the falling out, the anger, and the jealousy, as well as the details of the murder. Eva said she took so long to come forward because the other 2 girls had threatened to kill her if she ever revealed what she had seen. In March 1990, Karen and Laura were convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to 15 years to life in prison. The jurors were not convinced that the murder was planned, and they rejected the first-degree murder charge. Karen Severson was released from prison on December 9, 2011, after serving 21.5 years, and Laura Doyle was released from prison in December 2012, after serving 22 years. Karen Severson attempted to profit from her crime by writing a memoir about the murder and her prison life, but the book did not do well. She also made a deal for a movie to be made about it, but Avila's family sued her in 2015, seeking to take the profits from the sales. As a result, the state of California passed Missy's law, requiring entities who are helping publish works made by criminals to contact the families of the victims about the said works. Missy's story has sparked conversations about the impact of bullying, the complexities of teenage relationships, and the importance of fostering a culture of empathy and kindness. Community initiatives and support networks have emerged to provide resources and support for those affected by similar experiences. As we remember Missy, we honor her memory by working to create a world where friendships are built on trust and compassion. Her legacy serves as a reminder that every individual deserves respect, kindness, and the opportunity to live a life free from harm. In the end, Michelle Yvette Missy Avila's legacy will be one of resilience and hope. May her memory inspire us all to stand up against bullying, support those affected by betrayal, and work towards a future where understanding and empathy prevail. In Wives Swap USA took to the screens. Originally starting in the UK a year prior, the format was a success, and the reality show soon traveled overseas to be picked up by ABC. The premise was simple. Two different households, usually with dramatically different lifestyles, swapped wives and her mothers or sometimes husbands and her fathers over. They would spend 1 week playing by the family's rules, and then the second week with the family playing by the rules of whoever had joined, before reuniting with their own families to discuss the experience. 4 years into the show airing in America in 2008, viewers around the world were introduced to the Stockdale family. ABC producers were searching for a bluegrass family band specifically, and one that held strong faith-based traditional values. ABC found what they were looking for with the Stockdale family. The Stockdales consisted of Mother Kathy, aged 44, Father Tim, aged 48, and their children, 19-year-old Calvin, Charles, who is 16, 15-year-old Jacob, and the youngest son James, who was 11 at the time. It's said that despite Kathy and Tim being initially reluctant to want to participate in the show, the 4 boys were eager for the experience, and eventually the family decided to take the ABC producers upon their offer. Kathy and Tim had moved from the big city to a secluded and rural area in a village called Beach City in Stark County, Ohio, to raise their 4 sons. They lived on a farm on Dolphin Street, southwest in Bethlehem Township. Tim worked a full-time job, leaving the house every day at 5:30 a.m., and Kathy stayed at the farm to homeschool the children. The Stockdales were a deeply religious family, and Kathy said they had moved up to the farm to develop wholesome family values, and she and Tim wanted to protect their sons and keep them sheltered. Each person participating in the swap has to leave a list of rules that acts almost as a manual and explains the family's dynamics. In this extensive write-up, Kathy explained that the children were banned from watching TV, playing video games, listening to music unless it was approved by Kathy and Tim, and they weren't allowed to date. "I have never been on a date," 16-year-old Jacob said on the show. "There's better ways to find out about girls than dating." The children were homeschooled so Kathy, in her own words, could control their character and education, away from any influences of other students or teachers. She said that they ate breakfast at the same time every day, but if her boys were not on time, she would give them 2 minutes to arrive and then charge them 25 cents for being late. In order to earn privileges in the house, the boys had to complete chores to get tokens, which would go onto a chart on the wall. They could then exchange the tokens for things like listening to a family-approved radio show. By all intents and purposes, the family lived a fairly secluded life, having each other for company. Kathy said, she said that although she was raising her boys in a much stricter environment than her parents had raised her in, she felt it was for the best, given how times had changed. And ultimately, as a family, they believed that spending time together without anything interfering was the most important thing. The band had elements of gospel and comedy as well, and they would often compete in regional competitions and perform at bluegrass gatherings. They were all undoubtedly very talented, and the family said they enjoyed any chance to play and make music together. Tim said it was a good way to teach the children about working together and for them to earn some money. Kathy would act as the band's manager, and together the band produced 4 albums. The Stockdales swapped with the Tonkovich family, who couldn't have been more different. Lori Tonkovich attempted to change things up by giving the brothers more freedom, but she was met with fierce resistance. Lori said, "When I switched the rules and I was going to let them have fun, let them have television and video games and experience life a little bit, Jacob ran outside crying, and when I went out after him, I asked him what was wrong, and he said that his mom and dad would tell him he would burn in hell." After the wife swap experience was over, by all accounts things seemed to carry on as normal for the Stockdale family. They continued to perform with the boys, often winning competitions for their music, and they carried on working on the family farm. Almost a decade later, however, Calvin and Charles had moved out of the house and area. They had also officially left the family band, although they did still play music with them in the home whenever they returned to visit. Calvin began working at Hillsdale College in Michigan and Charles was studying to be a doctor in Philadelphia. 21-year-old James was studying business at university and was hoping to go into the business side of managing the family band. Kathy was still regularly uploading to her YouTube channel, which often showed the boys performing and getting up to various activities. Her last upload was on March 23, 2017, and showed her youngest son James in the snow, making jokes and kidding around. The remaining members of the Stockdale band, which were now Tim, Jacob, and James, and a family friend, Joe Steiner, were still finding a decent amount of success, and the band was completely booked up throughout the summer. The Stockdales attended a musical gathering with other family members and friends during the month of June, and one witness recalled that Jacob left early due to not feeling well. In mid-June, they performed at the Wildcat Ranch in Ohio. Nothing seemed amiss, and everything appeared as it normally was. At 4:36 p.m., police received a call. They could hear nothing, and whoever was on the end of the line swiftly hung up. Whoever made that call remains unclear. When authorities arrived at the location the call had come from, residents alerted them to gunshots that had been heard near the Stockdale family farm. Neighbors said they had heard between 10 and 12 shots, sometime between 1 and 3 p.m. As police approached the property, they saw the door was open and a figure was standing inside. They then heard a single gunshot. They found 25-year-old Jacob Stockdale on the floor with a gunshot wound to the head. He was bleeding profusely, but was still alive. Upstairs in the bathroom, they found 54-year-old Kathy. 21-year-old James was discovered near a door. Both of them were deceased, having died from gunshot wounds that had come from a 20-gauge shotgun, the same one found with Jacob. Jacob had taken the gun from the home, shot his mother and brother, then turned the gun on himself. Tim was out of the house at the time, as were Calvin and Charles. Calvin said, "James, our youngest brother, has always been a catalyst of family fun. He leaves behind many friends and a family that loved him dearly. My brother Jacob is still in critical condition, and we are praying for his physical recovery as our family makes funeral plans and begins the healing process." He also said that as a family they love him and forgive him. A grieving Tim said, "Kathy has been my beloved wife of 32 years and a wonderful mother to our 4 sons. She loved nothing more than being a mother and grandmother. She had a strong sense of learning and was passionate about her Christian faith, natural health, and organic farming." Jacob stayed in hospital for over a year, receiving numerous surgeries including reconstructive and extensive treatment for his severe brain injuries. He had lost all sight in his left eye and was living with at least 7 metal fragments permanently lodged in his head. In September 2018, after over a year of treatments and medical care, Jacob was charged with 2 counts of murder, and he entered a plea of not guilty by reason of insanity. A grand jury decided not to apply the death penalty in his case. In January 2019, Jacob attended a short hearing with his defense attorney, and his attorney requested a psychological evaluation of his client. After this, Jacob was placed in Heartland Behavioral Healthcare Hospital, a secure state psychiatric facility, because he was deemed not mentally competent to stand trial. He was assessed several times, but due to the brain damage after attempting to take his own life, the results were often differing. He tried to escape from the hospital twice, first in November 2019 by hiding in between book stacks, and a month later when he was caught trying to blend in with people walking out of the institution. A doctor who had been asked to assess Jacob said he was confident that after a year of treatment in Heartland Healthcare, he should be competent to stand trial. The trial was still proving tough to get started for various reasons. Delays due to the COVID-19 pandemic had pushed everything back, and Jacob's complete silence during the hearings meant it was even harder to move forward. Dr. Wood was sent in to assess Jacob. Due to hospital policies and COVID-19 restrictions, hearings and legal meetings were taking place over Zoom, but Dr. Wood was asked to go in person to talk to Jacob. Jacob was still not participating or answering questions, but after a long assessment, she eventually found him to have been clinically sane at the time of the murders. After this, the trial was finally able to move forward. It was originally set for the 26th of January 2021, but because of the restrictions due to the pandemic, this prohibited Jacob's attorney from meeting with him in person at the mental health facility. The defense requested a delay on legal proceedings, citing inability to adequately prepare for the trial. Judge Frank Fortuna allowed this and pushed the trial back to May 4, 2021. During this time, professionals inside Heartland Healthcare believed that Jacob was fit to leave the hospital and be moved to jail. Jacob had been keeping on top of his medications and participating in group therapy sessions and activities and seemed to be making big improvements. His defense attorneys argued that these improvements, however, proved that he needed to stay inside the hospital to continue making these positive steps, and they were worried that if he left, it would cause more harm to him and set him back. As the May trial loomed, the defense could no longer go with the insanity plea originally put forward, so they ultimately went with a guilty plea, in the hopes it may result in a reduced sentence. A week before it was due to commence, now 27-year-old Jacob Stockdale appeared before Judge Frank Forcione, who had been presiding since the start. He entered a plea of guilty to the murders of his mother Kathy and his younger brother James. The 2 firearm specifications were dismissed. The judge now had the task of sentencing him. At the sentencing hearing, Jacob's family declined to speak personally, but they gave a prepared statement to the chief prosecutor. Our family grieves the loss of Catherine Barbara Stockdale and James William Stockdale. Kathy was a loving mother, grandmother, daughter, sister, aunt, mentor, and friend to many. James was a loving son, brother, nephew, uncle, cousin, and friend to many. Kathy put all her efforts into homeschooling all 4 sons through their graduation from high school. Losing her encouraging words and comforting hugs has been devastating. James was a college student and dedicated musician, bringing smiles to all. While Jacob has no recollection of the events of that day, he trusts the legal system to do the right thing. It's beyond our understanding why this act was committed. One of the Stockdale brothers added, "We love you and forgive you for the role that you had in their deaths. To the degree that we are capable of knowing the hearts of Mom and James, we are convinced that they also forgive you for taking their lives." The letter went on to say that the family was so grateful to the first responders who had helped save Jacob's life that afternoon. The Stockdales requested that the judge be lenient and give Jacob the lightest sentence possible. His father Tim, who had been at every single hearing, said, "My sons and I continue to love Jacob." The judge sentenced Jacob to 15 years for each murder to run consecutively. He said, "I have to protect the public, and the nature of these charges are so gruesome. You will serve the next 30 years to life in prison." It is unconfirmed as to whether or not there is a parole eligibility date for Jacob, but if he serves out his full sentence, he will be almost 60 when it comes time for release. Although the reasons behind everything that happened that day remains unconfirmed, many people, along with Lori Tonkovich, who switched with Kathy on Wife Swap, believes that the strictness and pressures of the Stockdale household pushed Jacob to the extreme. That being said, what happened inside the Stockdale family home that day will never be fully known. The small glimpse we got into the Stockdales' home life isn't enough to paint a complete picture of the family and their dynamic. There is a lot of speculation and rumors about why this came to be, how it happened and what prompted it, but whatever happened and why, it is still a devastating ordeal for everyone involved in this case. Case of Ricky Neve. After 28 years, DNA from the clothes worn by 6-year-old Ricky Neve on the day of his tragic death matched with James Watson, who was a teenager at the time and had managed to evade justice for so long. Despite his mother's harsh way of raising her children, she seemed burdened with remorse and guilt for her actions, driving her to seek justice for her son's murder. Ricky's sisters were also determined to unravel the mystery and bring the killer to justice. But what truly happened in the household where Ricky and his sisters were raised, and what events occurred on the day of Ricky's murder, allowing the perpetrator to escape the law's grasp for so long? Ricky Lee Harvey, also known as Ricky Neve, was born on March 4, 1988, in the city of Peterborough, located in the county of Cambridgeshire in England, to Trevor Harvey and Ruth and Greg. Ruth's life had been marked by turmoil from an early age, with her being placed in foster care at the mere age of 2. Her younger brother, who was born blind at the tender age of 1, had already been placed in foster care. She endured a challenging journey through various foster homes before returning to her parents' care. Forever changed by the abuse and insults she suffered while she was under foster care, her empathy and affection dwindled with time, which was an observation made and reported by her mother to the authorities, a struggle that the mother had been dealing with too for quite some time. Tragedy struck again when Ruth's parents took their own lives as a suicide pact later on, leaving her to face the world alone once again. At 16, she met Trevor Harvey, settled in Cambridgeshire, and gave birth to their first child, Rebecca Maria Harvey, in 1986. They had their second child, Ricky, 2 years later. Their happiness was short-lived, as Trevor and Ruth separated when Ricky was only 3, but Ruth met Dean Neve not long after. They married and welcomed their first daughter into the world, and named her Rochelle Neve. The family later moved into the Wellender estate in Peterborough in 1992. Ruth decided to change Ricky's surname to match her new husband's, and he was now known as Ricky Neve. Sometime later, they welcomed another daughter and named her Sheridan Neve. They lived in Red Mile Walk, which was a part of the Welland estate that was well known for its association with crime and drug use. Unfortunately, the family's new home was riddled with challenges as Dean Neve was a notorious drug dealer, and Ruth had succumbed to addiction. She would even spend a lot on drugs to a point of neglecting her children's basic needs. Ricky and his sisters often wandered the estate without proper care, food, or clothing, drawing concern from neighbors who bravely reported the situation to social services. Ricky was the one who took care of his siblings when they were starved, as he would nick something from the shops and bring it to feed his siblings. He loved being clean, so he also made sure they were clean by running a bath for them. Dean was rarely at home, and Ruth often blamed Ricky for this, claiming that he was always away, since he hated his stepson. This made her start hating Ricky, as she would write to Dean during his prison stints, how she had hurt him by punching him and burning him with matches, and how she even wanted to kill him. She hated him more as she claimed that he would always laugh at her. The neighbors, often seeing the children outside, had no idea what really happened in that house. Ruth tormented and degraded the innocent children, frequently burning them with cigarettes and hurling insults at them. At one point, she even wrote "idiot" on their foreheads and forbade them from removing it. She would force them to stand for long periods of time while she smacked them on the head. She sent them to buy her drugs even after starving them. An allegation surfaced that she had been seen dangling Ricky by his ankles over a bridge. On one occasion, she forced Ricky to swallow liquid soap, and as he struggled to breathe, he managed to say, "I love you, Mommy." She would strangle the daughters to unconsciousness and even beat them with a hairbrush to the point of breaking it. They were even locked naked in rooms full of urine. The children tried to get the attention of their neighbors, which was often in vain as their cries were not heard by them. Ricky was placed on the at-risk register. After Ruth warned the child services repeatedly that she would kill him, he was taken into short-term care to give the mother some time. However, his files were mismanaged. Ruth, despite the clear evidence of the burns, cuts, and bruises on the children, would get away with it through her false explanations and excuses of accidents, and even blaming Ricky for being clumsy on his part. After 28 years, DNA from the clothes worn by 6-year-old Ricky Neve on the day he died tragically matched that of James Watson, the teenage killer who had managed to evade justice for a long time. Despite her cruelty in raising her children, Ricky's mother seemed burdened with remorse and guilt for her unforgiving actions, which drove her to seek her son's killer. Ricky's sisters were also determined to unravel the puzzling mystery and bring the killer to justice. But what really happened in the household, where Ricky and his sisters were raised, and what occurred on the day of Ricky's murder, allowing the perpetrator to escape the law's grasp for so long? On January of 1995, Ruth was suspected of murdering her own son during that very month. She faced charges of cruelty and neglect under the Children's Act and appeared at Peterborough Magistrates' Court, accused of cruelty towards Ricky and one of her other children. In May of 1995, Ruth was charged with the murder of her son and offenses of cruelty to him and 2 of his sisters. Her trial began the following year in October 1996 at the Northampton Crown Court. Prosecutors told the jury that Ricky and his siblings were treated with cruelty and neglect, backed by witness statements. The prosecution concluded that Ricky was killed in a sacrifice by his mother, based on her numerous death threats to him. Ruth admitted to charges of neglect and cruelty, but denied any involvement in her son's murder. The case hinged on the testimony of a policeman who stated that he had not found the child's body during his search of the woods, where Ricky was eventually discovered on the night of his disappearance. The prosecution claimed the officer might have missed it in the dark. The jurors acquitted Ruth, convinced that she couldn't have moved Ricky's body since the police were with her at the said time. However, she was sentenced to 7 years in jail for the cruelty towards Ricky and his sisters, charges to which she had already confessed. Ruth was released in 2000, but the killer remained a mystery. In 2008, she met Gary Rogers, who married her. By then, Ricky's murder had become a cold case, and the police had given up. Rogers promised Ruth that he would give her all the support she needed to reopen the case and try to find the killer. In 2013, with the help of Cambridgeshire Times editor John Elworthy, they worked tirelessly to campaign for the reopening of the case and eventually succeeded. Rogers secured the original files from Ruth's former solicitor, a collection of 13 boxes with 8 to 12 ring binders filled with papers, and diligently read through each one. They met Paul Fullwood, the head of the local major crime unit at the time, who listened to the evidence they had and saw the reviews that the police had done beforehand. He thought the original hypothesis of Ruth being the killer was fanciful at best, and the more he looked at it, the more he became convinced that they needed to investigate further. Mr. Fullwood organized a cold case investigation with a new team made up of staff not involved in the original investigation. With fresh perspective, determination, and what they deemed as a stroke of luck, new evidence that would help solve the crime was found in the forensic archives. The crucial evidence was a piece of sellotape used to collect fibers from Ricky's clothes. Advancements in DNA technology in recent years have played a crucial role in solving cold cases, bringing justice for victims whose killers were thought to have gotten away, and providing closure to family and friends. An unidentified DNA was found on Ricky's clothes, and forensic tests matched it to none other than James Watson. At the time of Ricky's death, Watson was only 13 and lived at Woodgate's Children's Home in Cambridgeshire, 20 miles away from Peterborough. He had moved there from foster care in March of 1994. On November 25, 1994, 3 days before Ricky's murder, Watson had asked his mother about a young child found dead in the woods. His mother, having no clue what he was talking about, brushed off the conversation, assuring him that nobody had heard of such a thing happening. Little did she know that he would be the one behind such an atrocity just 3 days later. Watson was questioned by the police after several witnesses claimed to have seen them together on that fateful day, but he vehemently denied it, stating he was nowhere near Ricky and that he only caught a glimpse of him. The mother also said nothing about the conversation they had, just some days prior about the made-up scenario of the young child in the woods, that would materialize in less than a week with an almost similar description to what had actually happened. Police did not further challenge him, perhaps due to ignorance or their preference for the idea of Ruth being the killer and not some disturbed teenager. They probably didn't know he was disturbed until later. Watson was of course searched for and arrested in April 2016 in connection with Ricky's murder. By then, he was already a serial offender with a criminal record that included stealing cars and an arson attack. At a British transport police station back in 2008. Questioned by the new investigation team about his DNA ending up on Ricky's clothes, Watson changed the story he had initially given to the police. He now said that he might have lifted Ricky to help him see over a fence. This statement started getting him into further trouble. The police tested his claim and found footage from 1994 showing the estate being redeveloped. They discovered that the fence was not built when Ricky Neve was still there, as it was constructed after he was already murdered. The investigators were therefore able to prove that Watson was not only a fantasist, but also a huge liar. However, this was still not enough to secure his conviction, so they started to pull other pieces of evidence together. It was not long until evidence was found that he had inappropriately touched a 5-year-old child when he was around 11 or 12, and his ex-girlfriend had also complained about him strangling her during sex. 2 teachers also revealed how he had become obsessed with Ricky's murder case, showing an unnatural level of interest in it, and even photocopying the front page of the Peterborough Evening Telegraph, which covered the case. More disturbing behavior had also been noted at the children's home where he lived, including him pleasing himself over pictures of young boys in underwear. He also kept a dead pheasant in his room, and it was claimed that he had on one occasion killed a bird and spread its wings in a sinister reconstruction of Ricky's murder. After being released on police bail, he left the UK 3 months later in a motorhome with another bail hostel resident. He traveled to Rotterdam, then France, and crossed the Pyrenees into Portugal. From France, he had reached out to his sister Claire Perna, admitting that he was in serious trouble and that he had made a massive mistake. The next time he called, he reiterated that he was in deeper trouble and urgently needed to return to the UK. He had shamelessly posted pictures of himself on social media, enjoying the beaches, bragging about how he got out of the country. Seeing the pictures of Watson abroad, which were extensively covered in the media, angered Ricky's family. They knew that since he had escaped the country even after his passport had been taken, he was definitely guilty of the act. Watson was eventually rearrested near the British Embassy in Lisbon and extradited back to Britain. He was found guilty of murder by a majority of the Old Bailey jury. Previously, the court heard how Watson's sexual interest in younger boys was known to police, who had interviewed him over an allegation that he molested a 5-year-old back in 1993. The disturbing behavior was noted at Watson's children's home, and the prosecution claimed it was no coincidence that 3 days before the murder, Watson was the source of a bogus radio report about a 2-year-old boy being strangled. Immediately after Ricky's murder in identical circumstances, Watson obsessed over newspaper coverage of the killing, copying front-page stories at school. The jurors heard that key evidence in the case against Watson included Ricky's last meal of Weetabix taken in the morning, which fixed his time of death at around noon when he was seen playing with Watson. It meant that Ricky was killed shortly after heading to the woods with Watson where he used to play. Watson's legal team had accused Ricky's mother, but she denied any involvement. Ricky's muddy Clark shoes also indicated his walk into the woods was a one-way trip and not a case of being murdered by the mother and the body being dragged into the forest, therefore ruling out that accusation. After a trial at London's Old Bailey that took place from January 18th to April 21st, 2022, James Watson, at the age of 41, was found guilty of Ricky Neve's murder. On June 24th, 2022, he was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 15 years by Mrs. Justice McGowan. The judge considered Watson's age at the time of Ricky's death as a significant factor in determining the sentence. In June 2023, Watson was granted permission to appeal his conviction. His lawyer argued before the Court of Appeal that Watson was not able to get a fair trial because too much of the evidence from which the killer's DNA could have been recovered was lost or destroyed in the intervening years. This case could have been solved much earlier if the official police records of 6 reported sexual assaults on children in the Welland estate in the 3-year period before Ricky's murder had been thoroughly investigated. If the reports had been followed up, the allegation on his record of touching a 5-year-old could have been a crucial lead to the police in finding the perpetrator. These failures in the investigation add to the list of the many shortcomings in this case. The verdict was a triumph for Ricky's sisters, who had never thought they would see justice for their beloved brother. With the killer finally caught, the family found a sense of closure, allowing them to move forward with their lives, while cherishing the memory of the little boy Ricky was back in 1994. Ricky Neve will forever be remembered as a loving and caring brother, and a brave and kind-hearted boy. Despite facing challenges at a young age, he showed remarkable courage and love and always protected his sisters. He deserved a life brimming with joy, but tragically he endured cruelty, neglect, and the ultimate horror of murder. If he had been given the love and affection he deserved, this heart-wrenching tragedy might never have occurred in the first place. Police sirens were heard throughout the Denver neighborhood on October 5, 1996, in response to a call about an apartment in the 1900 block of East 17th Avenue. Terry Turchak, a 35-year-old woman, was found dead inside. Terry was found by the police to have been strangled and had suffered serious head injuries. What could have happened between Terry and her attacker to cause her tragic death? And who could have committed such an evil act? With a population of 700,000, Denver, Colorado has a vibrant mix of history and culture that draws many visitors to its many museums. With a wealth of historical and recreational sites, this city seamlessly blends the old and the new. The small-town feel of Denver's neighborhoods is reflected in the welcoming locals, who are known for their adventurous spirit, and who frequently know their neighbors by name. However, Denver faces urban challenges, such as having one of the highest crime rates in the country. This problem casts a shadow over its tight-knit neighborhoods. The unsolved Terry Turt Shack case from 1996 serves as a sobering reminder of this darker side of the city's existence. Terry Turt Shack, who was born on May 14, 1961, was from Michigan's vast countryside. She was the daughter of James Cedric Shack, a brave Vietnam War veteran and honorable sergeant in the U.S. Air Force. Possessed a resilient spirit as a child, while the specifics of Terry's mother are still unknown. Her father, James, was the epitome of a loving father to Terry despite his tough exterior as a military man. The fact that Terry wasn't an only child is well known. A few years later after her birth, her younger brother, James Turchak Jr., joined the family, and the two of them quickly developed a strong and close bond that lasted well into adulthood. As time unfolded, Terry accepted motherhood with grace. Percud's names are unknown, but one thing was undeniable. Terry was a fantastic mother. James Jr. often recalled her maternal tendencies. Terry was always praised for the attention and love she gave to her children. As the years passed, Terry separated from her husband and had made a home at 1900 East 17th Avenue in Denver, Colorado. She had a complicated love life, although she was in a primary relationship. There were rumors that she was open to other options. Terry's life was in a stable period with friends, family, and the typical ups and downs. She was maximizing her lifetime, but because of the rise and fall of life, it is impossible to predict what lies ahead. Therefore, no one could have predicted that Terry's happy times were coming to an end. Denver's residents appeared to be going about their daily lives on Friday, October 4, 1996. Unaware of the impending tragedy, Terry Duracek completed her day at work and left for home with the intention of spending the evening with friends. She relished the solitude of her empty apartment while her kids were away. She got ready to partake in Denver's exciting nightlife as dusk fell. Around 8 o'clock, Terry left her apartment. Her spirit coexisted peacefully with the city's spirit. There are traces of Terry's nights scattered here and there. Around 11:30 p.m., a neighbor saw Terry coming home. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary, but time and events have a way of taking everyone by surprise. The next day, on Saturday, October 5th, the early morning sun casts long shadows over Terry's apartment building, which had become silent. Strangely, Terry's apartment door remained open. After hours passed, a worried neighbor didn't see the open door until the noon sun reached its highest point. He might have assumed she had overslept or that she was taking a shower. Just to be sure, he peered into Terry's apartment and shouted out her name, but he heard no response despite his voice resonating throughout the living room. Terry was nowhere to be found when a quick search of the living room and kitchen was conducted. The neighbor then made an attempt to do a last stop at her bedroom. He, however, couldn't believe what he saw when he arrived. Terry, who he had just seen the previous evening when she was vivacious and alive, now laid lifeless on the floor of her bedroom. His fear increased. He scrambled for his phone as he hurried outside and dialed 911. His voice trembled in shock as he spoke to the operator. Police sirens could be heard in the distance, getting louder and louder until there was a discord outside Terry's apartment. Police officers who had mastered composure intervened to take control while masking their internal dread. When Terry Turchak's body was found, her case was launched immediately. The entire community was affected, not just her family. Detectives from the Denver Police Department led the investigation to find out what caused this sinister discovery. They understood the significance of the scene in front of them right away. The bedroom depicts a violent story. There were obvious indications of a struggle, suggesting that Terry had fought hard for her life. In an effort to fill in the blanks of that fateful night, neighbors mentioned disturbances between 1 o'clock and 1:30 a.m. The door to Terry's apartment was obviously left open, a spooky invitation to the horror inside, but nobody had reported seeing anyone leave. Detectives speculated that the perpetrator might have known Terry or had gained her trust in order to take advantage of it in the most wicked way, given that there was no sign of forced entry. The medical examiner, Dr. D. Henry, had the grim duty of looking over Terry's body. The outcomes were unexpected. Terry had been severely assaulted in addition to being killed. Her death was attributed to strangulation, but there was also evidence of blunt force trauma, making for a horrifying end to a life that had otherwise been full of promise. A hair found on Terry's thighs stood out as detectives searched Terry's body. They hoped that this small strand of hair would hold the key to discovering who killed her. Investigators connected with Terry's friends and neighbors to piece together the story, and it didn't take long for perplexing tidbits of information to start to emerge. Around 11:30 p.m., Terry was last seen entering her apartment, and a neighbor noticed she wasn't alone. She was accompanied by an African-American man with a unique afro. It was unknown if he was a friend or enemy, but he was the last person seen with Terry. The timeline was further complicated when a different neighbor reported hearing noises coming from Terry's apartment around 12:30 a.m. It's interesting to note that Terry was observed knocking on another neighbor's door at 1 o'clock, appearing to be hurt and pleading asking for money. Could this be connected to the man she was seen earlier with? Terry's boyfriend, whose identity was kept private, provided the information that was the most revealing. While he had a story from the week before that raised questions, he had an alibi for the night of the murder. Terry and her boyfriend had been robbed and assaulted inside Terry's apartment by 3 unidentified African-American men. Was this incident related to her eventual homicide in any way? The detectives were plagued by that question. The weeks that followed saw the pursuit of leads. Terry was seen with a mysterious man who later became a person of interest. Was he related to the assault from the previous week? Or was Terry's request for cash that night somehow connected to him? Despite the police's best efforts, the reliable evidence required to identify a suspect eluded them. Even though a key suspect was brought in and subjected to questioning and DNA testing, disappointment sets in when the results were revealed. It did not match his DNA. With each passing day, the community's suffering grew worse. For clarification and some semblance of justice, the neighborhood looked to the detectives. The loss of Terry left her family devastated, and they clung to the hope that the offender would be caught and punished. But as the weeks turned into months, the once shining trail started to fade. Despite their best efforts, the detectives had to face the harsh possibility that they might never catch Terry's killer. Sadly, leads that had once shown promise dwindled, and the case became unproductive. However, the cold and seemingly unsolvable case experienced a sudden and unexpected resurgence in 2004. Time's veils, which had concealed clues and obscured the way to justice, were now starting to lift, nearly 10 years after the horrifying incident. In August of that year, there was a significant development. A hit was detected by the Cody's DNA system. It matched the DNA evidence that had been taken years earlier from Terry's body. For the investigators, this DNA had always been a loose end, a piece of the puzzle that wouldn't fit anywhere. But now there was a lead. The investigation into this reopened case was given to Detective Dixie, an experienced detective. She was determined to follow this new lead and see where the investigation would go. And this DNA trail led them right to Ricky Dawson thanks to her analytical mind and methodical approach. Ricky had experience with the law. His DNA was already present in the Cody's database, which suggested that he had a criminal history. An African-American man named Ricky Dawson unexpectedly found himself at the center of this investigation. After many years, the Terry Duracek case was once again the focus of the attention of the law enforcement community, now that they had a new lead and a rekindled zeal. It was hoped that this new lead would finally put an end to a troubling chapter in the city's past and bring justice to a person who had been wrong. With a name and a face to work with, Detective Dixie started attempting to understand the relationship between Terry and Dawson. Did they have a mutual relationship? Was there reason behind the killing? Were there any additional pieces of proof or witnesses that the initial investigation might have missed? As Detective Dixie dug deeper, it became clear that the task at hand was to confirm the DNA match, establish the story, and create a solid case against the new prime suspect. The Denver streets, where rumors and theories about the case once circulated, now awaited news over the case. They eagerly anticipated the day when they would declare Terry had received justice. The majority of the city was upbeat, but there were still many obstacles to be overcome. Although compelling, DNA evidence is not the be-all and end-all of a criminal case. Finding a suspect is one thing, but establishing their guilt beyond a reasonable doubt is quite another. On January 24, 1961, in Florida, Ricky Dawson, man whose life seemed to contain both darkness and light, was born. In 2004, he was 43 years old. It indicates that he was 35 at the time of Terry Turchak's tragic death in 1996. Terry wasn't his only link to the dark. Though Dawson had his own difficulties when he was younger, there were complications throughout his childhood. It's been said that a person's behavior as a child often provides a window into their future, and Ricky was no exception. His marital status, education, and other personal information are still unknown, but his criminal record is one thing that stands out. The criminal activity that Dawson is involved in is not just in Terry's case. His DNA was discovered to match an unnamed profile from a terrifying case that occurred in Seattle in 2000. Debbie Cascio, a 40-year-old woman, was his victim. The tragic circumstances surrounding Terry's death and Debbie's are similar. Like Terry, Debbie had multiple blunt force traumas and was in pain. Debbie was strangled and had multiple blunt force injuries like Terry as well. The unfortunate relationship between the two women and Ricky Dawson attracted the attention of the law. Once more, the city and Debbie's devoted daughter, Tabitha Johnson, both worked to preserve her memory as a gesture by the Homeless Remembrance Project to ensure Debbie's story is never forgotten. A leaf of remembrance at the Seattle Justice Center bears her name. Tabitha, who was only 11 years old when her mother died, has been a model of tenacity. She recalls memories of her mother, including times spent at the beach or creating art with glass. Even after becoming a mother herself, Tabitha is still grieving Debbie's loss, despite her desire for closure and justice. The specifics of her mother's case are still unknown because the Seattle police haven't disclosed more information. The criminal activities of Ricky Dawson continued beyond Seattle and Denver. In 2004, he ended up in Florida's police custody. At that time, Denver police learned that a DNA match connected him to the 1996 Terry Turchak cold case. While in Florida, he admitted guilt to second-degree murder in exchange for a 25-year prison term. Now, he is charged with first-degree murder in connection with the Terry Turchak case in Denver. The investigation into Terry Turchak's murder accelerated as soon as Ricky Dawson's name appeared. Detectives searched for any mention of Ricky in the case files and interviewed transcripts from the initial investigation. Although they weren't able to find his name right away, they were in for a surprise. Ricky's description of the man Terry was with the night she was killed matched that provided by her neighbors. Ricky's criminal history was quickly revealed, and it was shocking. He was a persistent offender. His name was associated with a long list of crimes. Detectives recognized him as a key suspect in Terry Turchak's case, and knew they needed to speak with him. At the Soani Correctional Facility in Florida, where Ricky Dawson was already incarcerated, they came face to face with him in December 2004. Finding out what Ricky knew about Terry and proving his involvement in her tragic demise were detectives' objectives. During the interview, another intriguing lead emerged. A friend of Ricky's whose name was withheld gave his account about the night Terry was killed. Terry was well acquainted with Ricky's friend. He acknowledged spending time in her apartment with her and Ricky, and even confirmed being there the night she was reported killed. He claimed that all three of them had used drugs. Even though he said he left at midnight, he wasn't aware of what happened next. The puzzle was beginning to come together. A path had now been set out in front of the detectives. They performed an important DNA test. The new DNA samples obtained from Ricky were compared to the major DNA profile of the hair discovered on Terry's body. And there was a match. With this concrete proof, Ricky Dawson's involvement in Terry's death was established, but unexpectedly, no charges were brought against him for her killing right away. Some speculated that this was because Ricky had already served about 20 years of his current sentence. As a result, Terry's case sat idle for more than 10 more years. 14 years later, a new hope for justice surfaced. Detective John McGrail from the Denver Police Cold Case Unit was tasked with reviewing the case. McGrail examined the case's details and came to the conclusion that the evidence present was quite convincing. In some ways, the case appeared to be settled. In order to cover all bases, he decided to submit the evidence for additional laboratory testing in December 2018. This included evidence gathered from the crime scene and Terry's post-mortem examination results. By August 2019, the DNA evidence findings had produced a solid match. The wheels of justice began to turn more quickly. Ricky Dawson, the Ricky who had been serving time in Florida's prison for a different crime, was the only person in whom the puzzle pieces pointed. With the fresh evidence in hand, it was obvious that it was time to hold Dawson accountable for the murder of Terry. Time traveled to January 26, 2023, which was an important day in the investigation. Ricky Dawson was officially charged with the first-degree murder of Terry Toetschak, and an arrest warrant was issued for him. At the age of 62, Ricky discovered himself in a more difficult legal situation. Even though he was already detained in Florida, justice did not stand still. The Denver Police Department obtained his extradition so that he could answer for his actions in Denver. On February 23rd, when Ricky learned of the allegations against him, the seriousness of the situation hit him. March 23, 2023, was designated as the date of the court appearance, which was eagerly anticipated. Many people anticipate Ricky Dawson will be found guilty for his role in Terry's tragic death. Despite the fact that the court's final decision has not yet been made public, they felt this way because of the mounting evidence against him. James Toetschak, Terry's brother, never fully recovered from the pain of losing his sister in 1996. He struggled for 27 long years, torn between hope and despair, wondering if Terry's premature death would ever bring about justice. James, however, was overcome by a wave of emotions after hearing the recent news of an arrest in relation to the murder of his sister. James spoke to the media about his unwavering dedication to his sister's case and how he had always held on to the hope that the truth would eventually surface. James became more aware of the seriousness of the situation when he learned that the alleged offender was being extradited to stand trial. He addressed the hole Terry's absence had left, calling it an irreplaceable loss that time would never fill. He often pondered the life experiences she passed up, particularly the joy of becoming a grandmother. James finally recalled that Terry had a contagious spirit that affected everyone she knew. James acknowledged that, despite having a desire for forgiveness, he is still working on it. It is a challenging journey because the pain is still too recent. Above all else, he made clear that he wanted justice to win. James wants to see Terry's memory honored by the justice she deserved 52 years ago by making sure Ricky Dawson faces the full force of the law and is imprisoned for the rest of his days. Case of Rowan Ford. Rowan Ford was born on April 11, 1998, in San Diego, California. Her parents divorced when she was young, and her mother, Colleen, moved with her to a small town called Stella in Missouri. Later, her mom met a man named David, and they got married. Colleen had several children from a previous marriage, and soon after their wedding, she and David had a daughter together. Altogether, Rowan had 2 sisters and 2 brothers, and they shared a very close bond. She spent a lot of time outdoors, riding her bike around town, enjoying swimming, and indulging in her passion for drawing. She also liked going to Sunday school at the local church, where she always volunteered to help other kids who had some issues with their tasks. In November 2007, when Rowan was 9 years old, she was in a 4th grade at the local elementary school. Her mom worked the night shift at a store while her stepdad spent most of the day on the farm, which made Rowan often fend for herself, making her very independent. On November 2nd, she stayed home alone as usual. Her mom went to work and her stepdad hadn't returned from the farm yet. The next morning, around 9 a.m., Colleen came home from her night shift and checked Rowan's room, but her daughter wasn't there. She asked her husband where her daughter was, and he said she had asked him if she could have a sleepover at a friend's house, and he had let her go. He didn't even ask the friend's name because their town was very small, and he wasn't worried about anything happening to her. But Colleen started to worry and decided to check with all of Rowan's friends. Since there were only a few streets in their town, it didn't take long, but none of them had seen her, and she hadn't stayed over at any of their houses, which made her mother even more concerned. Colleen searched the whole town but couldn't find her daughter. She went back home and told her husband that Rowan was nowhere to be found. She asked him to call the police and report her missing, but he reassured her that everything was fine and that she would come home soon. After waiting for several more hours with no sign of Rowan, Colleen took matters into her own hands and dialed 911 herself. The local sheriff immediately organized a search operation. He went to their house to speak with David, and as he was the last person to see Rowan before she disappeared, David said that on that evening, while he was working on the farm with his colleague Christopher, their mutual friend Nathan came by. They all decided to go to David's place to have some drinks and play pool. They stopped by the store, bought some alcohol, and went to David's house, where they spent several hours. Later in the night, Christopher asked Nathan to drive him home to the neighboring town, where his trailer was. They persuaded David to join them to continue the fun. Before leaving the house, he checked on Rowan in her room, seeing that she was asleep. David left with his friends, and they stopped by the store again to grab more alcohol and headed to Christopher's trailer, where they continued drinking for about an hour. After that, David decided to head home and asked Nathan to give him a ride. Nathan agreed, but chose to take back roads instead of the main highway. By that time, Nathan was quite drunk and didn't want to risk encountering the police. Nathan dropped David off and drove home. David went straight to bed. Soon after, he was awakened by Rowan, who asked if she could sleep over at a friend's house. Without much thought, he agreed and fell back asleep. Police approached this story with some skepticism. What puzzled them most was the fact that a 9-year-old girl decided to go to her friend's house in the middle of the night, and her stepfather let her go without even asking which friend she was talking about. The sheriff considered that David might be hiding something or directly involved in Rowan's disappearance, but he had no evidence to support this theory. Police searched the town and its surroundings until late at night. Local residents immediately joined the search, as they all knew Rowan's family and wanted to help. The population of Stella was only about 150 people, so news of her disappearance spread throughout the county. People were used to being able to let their children play outside without a worry, as nothing ever happened in such a quiet place. But now that Rowan vanished without a trace, and the police were unable to find her for a whole day, the residents of Stella were in a state of panic. The search for Rowan yielded no results on the first day. However, the investigation progressed on November 4th, when the police spoke with Christopher in a neighboring town. He corroborated David's account, but revealed that David had not contacted him to inform him of Rowan's disappearance. Christopher stated he had not spoken with Rowan or her friends since that evening. Despite an expanded search with more volunteers, the police failed to find Rowan or any clues about her disappearance. The following day, the FBI joined the investigation while the local police continued searching the town and surrounding areas. As a result of growing skepticism towards David's account, detectives started focusing on a potential abduction. They spoke with all of Rowan's friends and verified that none of them had seen her on the night she went missing. As investigators questioned David, his account raised even more suspicions. David's details were inconsistent and contradictory. He altered the timeline of his whereabouts that night on multiple occasions. Additionally, David speculates that it is possible that Rowan left without his permission, which makes his story even more suspicious. During their investigation, FBI agents found out that David had borrowed his mother's car on the night of Rowan's disappearance, a detail he initially left out when questioned by the police. This new information led the authorities to seize both his mother's car and his own pickup truck for forensic examination. But unfortunately, no evidence was discovered. As part of the investigation, detectives wanted to speak with Christopher and Nathan again, since both had been with David that evening. Christopher was invited to the police station for further questioning, where he recounted the same story as before. He also agreed to take a polygraph test, which showed no signs of dishonesty. After leaving the police station and returning to work, Christopher noticed Sheriff Clark's car and signaled for him to stop. As the sheriff of Whitton, where Christopher lived, Clark had known him since childhood. Sheriff Clark was close friends with Christopher's foster parents and was someone Christopher had always looked up to and sought advice from in times of need. Sheriff Clark met with Christopher to discuss Rowan's disappearance. Although familiar with the case, Clark hadn't been directly involved since the investigation was led by the Stella Department. During their conversation, Clark noticed that Christopher was acting strangely, which led him to suspect that Christopher might be hiding something. Given the gravity of the situation and Rowan's uncertain fate, Clark shared his concerns with the FBI. His call prompted investigators to consider the possibility that Christopher might be withholding crucial information that could link Rowan's stepfather to her disappearance. They wondered if Christopher's actions were directed by Rowan's stepfather to lie and whether Christopher feared being seen as an accomplice if he told the truth. Sheriff Clark told the FBI agents that he had a close relationship with Christopher and offered to help persuade him to cooperate. That evening, Christopher visited Colleen's house to ask about the search progress. FBI agents also arrived to speak with Colleen again and saw Christopher there. They asked him questions and he repeated his previous account. However, Christopher then mentioned for the first time that he didn't rule out David's possible involvement in Rowan's disappearance. He expressed his willingness to help uncover the truth, even if it was terrible, and suggested wearing a wire to talk to David and try to get him to confess. The detectives decided against this approach. Instead, they asked Christopher to suggest locations where David might have hidden Rowan's body. Christopher provided several locations, which the police searched the next morning. Meanwhile, FBI agents questioned David again, but he continued to deny any involvement. Detectives searched Christopher's home for leads, but the search yielded no results. Meanwhile, Christopher visited the sheriff's office to discuss his encounter with the FBI with Clark. During their conversation, the sheriff sensed that Christopher was holding back information. After their meeting, Clark reached out to the detectives again, suggesting that Christopher might be withholding crucial information that helped prove David's involvement in the case. The FBI agents asked the sheriff to persuade Christopher to open up, as he had been in regular contact with Clark to discuss the case. It seemed that Christopher wanted to share important details but was hesitant to do so for unknown reasons. The following day, November 7th, the police asked Christopher to return to the station. They requested his permission to search a safe located in David's house, where Christopher had been living temporarily and still had some belongings. Christopher agreed to the search and also allowed the police to search his trailer and car. Additionally, Christopher voluntarily provided a DNA sample and agreed to answer the detectives' questions again. During the questioning, he was asked to confirm David's story, but this time revealed that his friend's account was not entirely accurate. The investigators then pressed him to disclose what really happened that evening. Christopher became agitated when the police treated him like a suspect in Rowan's disappearance. He refused to continue the conversation and left the station after warning the detectives that he might hire a lawyer. Later that evening, Christopher met with Sheriff Clark to express his concerns about the detectives' behavior. Clark acknowledged Christopher's right to remain silent, but explained that the police were doing everything possible to find Rowan. Christopher stated that he would no longer cooperate with the detectives and would only speak with Clark if he had any further information to share. Clark continued to encourage Christopher to open up, and eventually, Christopher broke down in tears, claiming that he loved Rowan and would never harm her. During his time living with the David family, Christopher formed a close bond with Rowan and the other children. They grew to treat him like one of their own, even affectionately referring to him as Uncle Christopher. Sheriff Clark realized that Christopher was on the verge of revealing crucial information. But just as he was about to open up, a visitor arrived at the police station, briefly distracting Clark and causing Christopher to leave. Sheriff Clark reached out to the FBI, updating them on his conversation with Christopher. Clark explained that Christopher was almost ready to disclose what he knew, but warned that pressuring him too hard could lead to him becoming defensive and seeking the help of a lawyer. Clark recommended giving Christopher time to reflect, and the detectives agreed. The search for Rowan continued the following day but yielded no results. However, a new clue came on November 9th, exactly 1 week after her disappearance. Search teams converged on a remote area near the town of Powell, about 10 miles from Stella, and made a significant discovery in the fields and woods, a large pit in the ground. When authorities searched the area, they found Roland's body hidden under leaves and debris. She was not wearing any clothing from the waist down except for a pair of stockings. A medical examination revealed signs of strangulation and evidence of a sexual assault. After the discovery, FBI agents reached out to Sheriff Clark, asking him to speak with Christopher again, hoping Christopher would now be more forthcoming. Sheriff Clark learned that earlier that morning, Christopher had visited the station, looking for him, and told other officers that he needed to speak with Clark urgently. Sheriff Clark then began searching for Christopher, checking all his usual locations, but he was nowhere to be found. This continued until Christopher contacted Sheriff Clark himself, sounding distressed and asking if he was being followed. Christopher explained that after hearing about Rowan's body, he had driven around town to clear his head and noticed a gray car following him. Sheriff Clark assures Christopher that he knows nothing about the surveillance and suggests they meet in person. When they met, Christopher appeared nervous and expressed concerns for his safety. He feared that with Rowan's body found, he might be accused of murder and that someone might seek revenge against him. Clark took Christopher to the police station, and he said that now, when the case had been classified as a homicide, it was time for Christopher to reveal everything he knew. However, when Clark asked Christopher to share what David had done to Rowan, Christopher became emotional and hesitant to talk at the station. He explained that there were too many people around and suggested they move to a quieter location. Clark agreed, and they drove to a small bridge a few miles outside of town. Once they arrived, Christopher asked Clark to handcuff him. Clark was surprised but tried to reassure Christopher that it wasn't necessary. Christopher insists that what he is about to say will change everything and that Clark will then have to arrest him. Christopher then began recounting the events of that night. He told Clark that he, Nathan, and David had gone to his trailer to continue drinking. Later, his friends decided it was time to head home. Nathan gave David a ride, and they chose to take back roads to avoid the police. Christopher had shocked Clark that he had intended to sexually assault Rowan. To carry out his plan, Christopher took advantage of the time when his friends were busy taking a detour through the field. He drove straight to David's house via the main highway. Under the cover of darkness, he slipped into Rowan's room, picked her up, and quietly transported her to his vehicle, carefully avoiding detection as she slept. When they reached his trailer, he sexually assaulted Rowan. This was interrupted when Rowan regained consciousness and tried her best to free herself, but to no avail. During the crime, Christopher took precautions to avoid recognition, deliberately choosing to keep the lights off and maintain his silence. He originally planned to return Rowan to her home under the guise of innocence, but under the illumination of a bright moon, Rowan finally laid eyes on Christopher as he transported her from the trailer. He grabbed a rope, resorted to force to resolve his predicament, and took Rowan's life with his bare hands. He frantically thought of ways to cover up his crime. He got in his car and began driving around the county, pondering methods of disposing of the body. He then remembered a large pit near a neighboring town and headed in that direction. When he arrived, he dumped Rowan's body in the hole and attempted to cover it with tree branches. Returning to the trailer, Christopher discovered traces of Rowan's blood on his clothes and mattress. He also realized he needed to dispose of her pants, underwear, and the rope used to kill her. He gathered these items and placed them in a large barrel, intending to burn them. However, he quickly reconsidered, realizing that a large fire would likely attract unwanted attention. Instead, Christopher dragged the barrel into a shed, closed the door, and started the fire inside. This revelation shocked Clark, who had previously suspected David of committing the crime and believed Christopher was withholding information. It was difficult for Clark to accept that a man he had known for nearly 20 years, a man with 3 young children of his own, was capable of such brutality. Although Christopher appears to be a good-natured man, his true nature is much more worrying. After finishing his story, Christopher willingly went to the police station with Clark. Once there, Christopher repeated his confession to the FBI agents and was subsequently arrested for murder. He also gave the authorities permission to search his trailer and car. As he concluded his confession, Christopher expressed regret over his actions and stated that he had cried uncontrollably the following day. The detectives then informed David about Christopher's confession. Given David's suspicious behavior and inconsistent statements, they suspected he might be covering for his friend. However, during interrogation, David revealed a shocking new testimony. David claimed that when he found Rowan missing from her room, he suspected Christopher might have taken her. He took his mother's car and drove to Christopher's trailer. He found Rowan lying on the bed. Christopher leaned towards her. Instead of rescuing Rowan, David joined in and also sexually assaulted her. He then helped Christopher kill her and dispose of her body. David reported that during that traumatic incident, his brain went into shock and he had no memory of the night for several days. The detectives, surprised by this new information, re-questioned Christopher to verify David's claim. However, Christopher maintained that David was not involved and that incident unfolded as he had initially described. The inconsistencies puzzled the detectives, but Christopher's account still matched incident that had occurred. Medical examination revealed that the victim was strangled with a thin rope, a detail that only the killer would be aware of. A search of the trailer led to the discovery of a barrel containing ashes and hair similar to Rowan's was found in Christopher's car. Although investigators were still uncertain about the truthfulness of each man's account, both David and Christopher made incriminating statements. As a result, David was also arrested, and the case were sent to court for further proceedings. During the trial, Christopher requested that his statements be excluded from the case, arguing that he was not aware they could be used against him and that the police had violated his rights. However, the judge rejected this request, as all of Christopher's conversations with investigators were voluntary. Christopher also attempted to present mitigating circumstances, citing his difficult childhood as a factor. He had been shuffled between biological and foster parents from a young age, which had a significant impact on him. Despite these efforts, Christopher was unable to avoid punishment. In 2012, 5 years after the murder, Christopher was sentenced to death. He appealed the sentence but was unsuccessful. In contrast, David's situation was more complex. Although he admitted to assaulting and killing Rowan, his account conflicted with Christopher's statements, creating a significant problem. If the prosecution had charged David with murder, it could have potentially led to Christopher's conviction being overturned, allowing David to avoid accountability as well. However, due to the lack of concrete evidence, such as DNA, in fact, they were still uncertain about David's involvement. Although it was possible that David might have collaborated with Christopher in committing the crime, there was no supporting evidence for this theory. To minimize the risk of overturning Christopher's sentence, the prosecution made the difficult decision to reduce David's charges. As a result, David pleaded guilty to 2 lesser charges: child endangerment and obstruction of justice. David received an 11 years prison sentence with a minimum of 5 years to be served. This outcome sparked widespread outrage as many felt that if David was indeed involved in the murder, his punishment was disproportionately lenient. Unfortunately, this sentence is now final and it is unlikely that David will face retrial for this case. Christopher remains in prison awaiting execution, but it's uncertain whether the death penalty will be carried out due to the often lengthy time between sentencing and execution, which can span decades, meaning he might spend the rest of his life in prison instead. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the depths of unsolved mysteries. Cold cases not only challenge our understanding of the past, but also ignite our curiosity and determination for answers. Remember to subscribe to stay updated on our latest investigations. And if you have any information regarding the cases we've covered, don't hesitate to reach out. Together, we can shed light on the shadows of the past and bring closure to those who seek it. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and never stop seeking the truth.